Welcome to Under the Rug at Work, where we shine light on things that are normally swept under the rug. I'm your host, Nicole Turnbull, and today I'm chatting with Ruth Kent about proactive interventions. Ruth is the founder and director of Sunrise Well, which provides workplace wellbeing consulting, training, and coaching. Ruth, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Nicole. It's great to be here.
Yes, and I'm excited about this topic because when we talk to workplaces, as you do, they say to us, "What is that?" So we're going to dive into it to help make it easier for workers and workplaces. But before we do, for people who might not have met you before, can you share a little bit about your background and why you started your business?
Yeah, sure. I always wonder where to start with this because, it's so hard to pass out which things to include and which things to leave out. So way back at university, I studied psychology, health sociology, and then I went on to do a postgrad diploma in international public health. And I actually fell into teaching English as a second language for a few years. I found my way up from there into higher education. So I worked on academic communication skills for diploma level health science students as they were going into university. And it was around that time that I started my business, Sunrise Well.
Mm.
And I wanted to bring together, I guess, the public health side of my training and my understanding of people and population health and the way behavior change can be used to help move people along in their health and well-being. And I also wanted to bring in the facilitation skills that I had and some of the other trainings. So I studied things like mindfulness, advanced mindfulness teacher training, yoga, wellness and health coaching, and thought about how can I bring this all together. And so that was around 2013. And that's when I started to deliver basically education programs on health and well-being in the workplace. And I think, in terms of the work that I do, the pattern has, or the work itself has changed over the years. They're kind of corresponding to the changes in the conversations we're having
Yeah.
around health and well-being. And in the last few years, I guess it's broadened out to have that more systems level understanding. So I still provide health and well-being education, and that's a big part of what I do. But I also consult and help workplaces to understand what's going on in the well-being landscape in Australia and around the world, and the way that conversation has shifted in the last few years. And I think it's really amazing to be a part of that conversation because we're really moving that needle from what we thought was a good thing to be doing into something that really is having a proper positive impact on workplaces. So, yeah.
Yes. And it's all so interconnected. And
Yeah.
it's like your background has brought you to where you are today to help in such a unique way that really is needed kind of everywhere because it is part now of psychosocial safety and even and physical safety. Like we are
Yeah.
all interconnected and one being our mental health and our physical health are often related and one can lead to an impact on the others. And with the
Absolutely.
legislation changing, we need to make sure that we are positive and proactive and preventing these things.
Yeah.
But where do we even start? What does that actually mean to you, proactive intervention? What does that mean?
Well, I mean, I guess the way I look at it is I have it set out in my mind as three domains.
Mhm.
And we have the compliance domain, which obviously, in terms of putting together your risk management plan and strategies, this is a key part of any organization's work. But on the side of that, we have two other areas. And the second domain that I talk about is the prevention strategies that support that compliance. And that's around taking that step back and understanding as an organization. So identifying where the risks might be and saying you know, um, to the people involved, well, what can we do on the front foot so that these things don't happen in the first place?
Mm.
So if they have identified risks in certain areas, such as risks around bullying and harassment, then can we put in some training programs, and not just sort of this one-off, let's
Mm.
do a happy day kind of training program that people are not really invested in, but embedding it into the actual structure of the organization, the onboarding process, anytime team leader is promoted, that they go through this training. So it's actually embedded in the processes within the organization. So they might do, for example, unconscious bias training that just helps people to understand where this might be showing up and how it might be affecting them in their day to day.
Mhm.
So that's more directly related to that compliance activity. So if you, like I said, you step back, you do your risk management plan, and then you can step out a little bit and say, well, what do we need to put in here to help these things or prevent these things from ever happening in the first place? So we put those in place. And then that third level that I like to talk about is a buffer prevention activity, which is really strengthening the or diving into the strengths of the team themselves. So building up the psychological safety, doing the kind of prevention programs that some individuals will need essentially, and some others will pick up along the way, and maybe they'll use it later on. I think a really good example of that is something like sleep. So
Mm.
fatigue and sleep, this is where it gets really complicated, I think, because you can go through and do your risk management plan to prevent fatigue in the work design, and then you can still have people turning up exhausted because of things that are going on at home. And I think if you really have to think about, well, how can I support this worker so that they are coming to work feeling fresh and refreshed and showing up and performing well, but also, that they are that you are mitigating the risk in all aspects of that person's performance, if that
Mm.
makes sense. So
Mm.
you could, if you've got a team leader, for example, who um, you may reduce all of the risks in the workplace, but they're still turning up exhausted day after day because they have a newborn at home.
Yeah.
It may be that some education in this case is going to actually help them to make some decisions and some changes in their lifestyle that does have an impact at work. And so it's about looking at that more holistic, how can you help in many different domains all at the same time? That's the way I look at it.
Yes, and I think that's one of the big sticking points for workplaces as well is they're like, well, if we do all of these things, or we are doing all of these things, but people are like, for example, I've had conversations recently with employers who and managers who know that some people go out and party on the weekends and maybe don't get enough sleep or any sleep, or maybe
Mm,
taking drugs and alcohol outside of work, which is impacting inside of work as well. And yeah, they really do get stuck with that. And do you have any suggestions, or how do you kind of navigate that with employers when it's like there is that big picture? We are a whole person,
mm.
around that education piece.
Well, so firstly, I think it's worth noting or talking about how when you're going through a compliance or when you're going through your risk management process, really thinking about how involved are we, or how much are we involving the employees in this process? So if you can go all the way back to that first step, which all organizations should be doing, which is to do their risk management processes and having a look at what's going on in the organization. That's where the conversation should be beginning with the employees, and actually bringing in like a co-design style or approach to the entire process. And this is where you can get the data and the insights around what's actually going on with the employees. So that would be my first sort of point of call, is to suggest that they need to be bringing in those people right from the beginning and
Mhm.
having those conversations. Sorry. And the other area that I often talk to them about is how much within the culture of the organization, how much is this embedded?
Yeah.
Because again, if it's just one of those sort of let's tick the box, or we'll do it one day out of the year, or one person is dealing with it, but we don't have various departments of the organization conversing and talking to each other,
Mm.
then this is where it just kind of falls through the cracks and just becomes something no one's really paying attention to.
Yeah.
So it's sort of getting the leaders to understand that this should involve the leadership, HR, the occupational health and safety team, or,
Mm.
the various departments that are involved there. And this should be, the way I see it, is as a live document, not
Yeah.
as a one and done, once a year, tick it off
Mm.
type of thing. And then from there, that's where we can build that culture out. And for me, that's a big piece within this conversation, is how do we create the culture of health and safety? And it's not just physical health and safety, but the psychological health and safety.
Yeah.
And this again comes back to the leadership. And so it's coming down from the leadership to understand just how important it is, and
Mm-hmm.
then bringing that into the conversations, through the ranks down through the managers. And so then we can start seeing the modeling coming through.
Mm.
And this plays into that as well. How much is this being modeled?
Mm.
um, and then we need to also understand, this is going a little bit left field, but when we're putting together wellbeing programs, how directed and targeted are they? Even how well are they being communicated?
Yeah.
So are they being communicated? You're talking about, for as an example, someone who goes off drinking or taking drugs on the weekend. Well, maybe the whole program is not being communicated to this person or this
Yeah.
group of people effectively. And
Mm.
so, I talk a lot about that when we look at the sociocultural lens, or the various ways that we can look at our communication of health and well-being.
Mm.
And sometimes what is missing is that the communication is being directed to a specific demographic.
Mm-hmm.
And there are certain people on the margins who are just not buying it, they're not picking up on it, the
Mm-hmm.
programs themselves are not directed for them. So there are so many
Yeah.
layers that you can peel back on this,
Yeah.
um, as an organization. But like I said, the first place that I would be starting is all the way back at that compliance level, and
Yeah.
making sure everyone's on board, and that it's actually a cultural change that's taking place, not just another tick the box.
Yeah. And it's things like this, the tough things where you're like, right, we know this is a risk. So we need to be able to manage it, and it's better to do that proactively, pri
Mm.
other than rather than, sorry, waiting until an incident happens. So if it is drugs and alcohol, for example, it's about understanding, well, what is the drug and alcohol policy? Are we going to
Mm.
tolerate that or not? What do we need to put in place to make sure that not only are the workers safe, but the rest of the team are safe as well, clients are
Oh, absolutely.
safe.
Yeah.
Yeah, looking at it that way, it's like, right, that's a proactive approach. What are the risks? And then how do you help fix them before they become a problem? What can we do to help mitigate it to make sure that there isn't a big problem in the end? Um,
Mm.
but is there anything else that you can think of, or some of the reasons why workplaces find proactive approaches so hard to grasp?
Um, Let me see. I guess I'm just trying to think off the top of my head. Why do they find it so hard to grasp? I guess it's really, part of it is, I think that we do things, this is the way things are done. This is
Mm.
part of going back to that culture thing, where this is the way we do things, and it just kind of comes along as, well, we're ticking the box here. It's not as complicated as it seems. And you get someone to go through a sort of a 1 day training or a half-day training on psychosocial risk, and then we'll just make sure that that person's up to speed on it, and then like let them run with it without really considering, first of all, the risks. I think this is the big one in doing
Yeah.
something like that. But then also what benefits there could be if they were going to take it a little bit more seriously.
Mm.
So this is sort of something that I see quite a lot, is that people, leaders especially, are not really taking it as seriously as they probably should. And
Yeah.
like you were saying about being proactive in that sense, that rather than waiting for something to happen and then putting something into place,
Yeah.
and that's just not good enough. It's
Yeah.
not good enough to wait for that, for something to go wrong. You're not going to be able to capture every single issue.
Yeah.
That's why I talk about it being a live document, that it does need to, you kind of need to be on the board, on the ball with it all the time, and just, you know, doing what you can in the moment, or prior to it happening. But if it does if there is an issue that starts coming up,
Mm.
dealing with it, as you said, proactively as well as you can, this is what demonstrates being proactive and preventative in terms of the legislation,
Yeah.
and showing that you're not just waiting and fixing something up at the end.
Yeah. And we're often so busy doing the work that we don't think
Mm,
about things until they happen. And what I like to share with workplaces is that if you work with people, you will have all of the psychosocial hazards.
yeah, yeah,
Every
exactly.
single one of them. So it just depends on the extent and your team and the culture and all of the things that you've said, previously. So to have a look at
Mm,
it from that perspective, to say, right, there's not one that we don't have. How are we going to manage it if it does happen? So what can we do
mm,
to prevent it from happening? And just go through the list, if nothing else, and have a chat with your team to say, hey, we might have these, even if we don't right now, then we might have it in the future. How could we prevent these things from happening? What could we do as a team? Or do you see the risks? And yeah, as you said,
mm,
bringing that consultation piece in, making sure that we're talking to people about it and making it
mm.
easier for everyone. Because I get a lot of clients or people in workplaces seem to think that it's a failure if we have these things and they try and,
Mm,
sweep them under the rug.
absolutely.
But we're all human. We have
Yeah.
bad days, things happen, and it's about working together to improve the workplace for everyone. So, looking at it
Yeah.
from a different lens is often a good way to do it.
And I think, sometimes, as we were talking about earlier, people can be overwhelmed with the concept of doing something like this, or, the legislative language and things like that, the legalese, and it can be really off-putting. I think, especially if you are not, the size of your organization is not one that, you can tap into the legal department or get that type of advice. And so I think just taking, yeah, as you said, like taking those steps to even just get that list and tick it off, and sort of say, well, where do we see this showing up, and getting proactive again
Yeah.
about, being, on the front foot with it is so, so important. And it's so easy for people to be put off by it all. And that, again, it's a risk, but it's also, it's um it's an opportunity if people can sort of take that step forward and do it, and it can make a huge difference.
Yes, and they'll feel involved and empowered and be able to contribute to the solutions. And I know you have already shared a couple, we've chatted about a few already, but do you have any more examples of proactive interventions that can help buffer those risks?
Yeah, so I mean, as I said, for me, it comes down to the domains.
Mm.
So, for me, a big one is the training that should be going along with the psychosocial risk. So you could take almost any of them and
Mm.
say, well, how can we build out some support and training around this? So, basically any of the psychosocial hazards that are mentioned, it's really, worth looking at. Well, what can we do to support our teams on the front foot,
Yeah.
in that respect? And unconscious bias is obviously a big one. Bullying and harassment is another big one. And ensuring that, again, it's not just a one-off training, or it's a tick the box thing, that it really is embedded into the whole process.
Mhm.
The other big thing that I like to talk about is psychological safety. So this is a big one that I think we really, you can easily miss the mark if you don't have a good grasp of how to build that into your teams and build it into the organization. Because what I see happening is, the let's say the PCBU is going through and doing this process, But they're kind of failing to see that some people are not voicing their concerns
Mm-hmm.
easily because of the culture either within the whole organization or just within the teams. And
Yeah.
so going down and really drilling down and understanding, well, this particular team is going through some issues here, and how can we support them to build up the psychological safety so that
Yeah.
we can have that ongoing support throughout the year for
Mm-hmm.
them to be able to voice any concerns that are going on for them. Because if you have a team leader in their role, and there's not that sense where that people can share what's going on with their workloads, or that things are going on for them, that they're having trouble managing their tasks, and all the different things that can come up, then we're not going to get that real data. And I mean, I've seen some great apps that have come in
Mm-hmm.
on managing and getting a good sense of what's going on within the organization. But again, I hesitate on the fact that I think that we need to have people feeling safe enough to voice their concerns, even anonymously. I think it's the same as an EAP, where people are hesitant to use an EAP, and some people feel as though that their information is going to be shared back to the organization. And so getting people on board even to take up those types of things like apps or support processes, we need to step back a little bit and say, well, how can we build up the trust
Mm-hmm.
for them to be able to do that? And so then going back that step further and saying, well, what things can we do to make this available for them, or make it an opportunity for them to be able to do that? So of course we bring in training again, but
Yeah.
it's not just the training, it's the modeling by the leadership, it's the conversations. I often talk about well-being conversations and how we should be checking in, rather than it being sort of a once a year "are you okay" day type of
Mm-hmm.
phenomenon, which is great, awareness raising. But how can you embed this process into your team meetings, and
Mm-hmm.
even bringing in as a performance metric, as a KPI for team leaders, to be having regular well-being conversations with their team members,
Mm-hmm.
so this trust builds up over time. And
Yeah.
this is when you start to see people sharing what's going on, and
Mm-hmm.
you can pick up on things that they might not have shared straight away,
Mm-hmm.
and they may be putting off sharing it with their managers and team leaders until it's way down the line and it starts becoming a really big issue. So going back to that prevention side of things, what can you do to help people to catch them earlier upstream, as we say,
Yeah.
further upstream, so that they're not reaching that point where they're either burning out, or they're not coming into work because they're having, major issues with a particular person.
Mm-hmm.
There are so many things that could, like you said, so many things could be happening, but what can you do to be on the front foot for that? So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, that's great. And can we take it a step further to say, how can leaders and teams bring it into our day-to-day life? I know you've shared a
Mm.
couple of things there, but what are some of the actions that people could do tomorrow? And I always say, like, have a one-on-one. If you don't not having one-on-ones with your team members, they should be frequently. Ask them how frequent they want them, but how else can we bring it into our day-to-day work tomorrow?
Yeah. Look, I think, as you said, those conversations absolutely essential. And then obviously, this depends on the work design and the way that you've structured all of the policies around that. But we want to be able to build in, even on a very practical level, into people's calendars. So depending on your how you can build this out in your own policies, but looking at, can we build in spaces within the calendar where we are having just connection time, where we can have team members meeting, and they don't have to be meeting to talk about work. These can be designated non-work meetings, so that they can actually have a real conversation outside of work. And things like I've seen some great organizations building small clubs, or you can call it what you like, but having people connect over things that they're related to each other in some way, some kind of interest or topic, where they meet and connect and talk about it, and it's unrelated to work. And this just helps people to build up that trust and that connection, and the safety. And as I've talked about being a buffer, this is a great way for people to build connection, and not the more human our connection and our interaction is, the
Yeah.
more we can build empathy and build that sense of trust and connection with each other. And so those are some of the things. I think it's like taking a step out of the process of your day to day and
Mm,
asking, well, what could we do to build trust, connection,
mm,
and thinking about this more as I said, in those three domains, as a buffer that can help people to be able to share when things are going wrong. But even from a more positive point of view, it can in some cases create that buffer where people are not going down that stream of whatever
mm.
unhelpful or unhappy type of interactions they might have.
Yeah. Yeah, and look, as we said earlier, we are all so busy that we often are reactive because we're doing all of the things. We've got life, we've got work, we've got outside stuff, we've got inside stuff. There's always often too much work and not enough people to do them.
Mm.
So what advice would you give to a manager who wants to shift from that reactive space to proactive? What can they do to start? Where do they start?
Yeah, like we said, obviously starting with those conversations, for me, that's a big piece.
Yeah.
And thinking about how they're modeling their own management of the work that's going on, and making sure that they are, that they are being proactive themselves with
Hmm.
clearly communicating to others when their workload is not going how it should be, or that they're not feeling comfortable with the work demands that they have, so that they're setting up that kind of um, culture within their small team, that
Mm,
they feel as though they can share that type of information with each other.
yeah.
Because I think that this is one of the things where we sort of people are quite hesitant to share, if their workload is becoming overwhelming. And we might have, for example, it's quite common that someone in the team, maybe they're away for a long time, or maybe, they've been seconded to a different area, and
Mm,
somehow the rest of the team just kind of absorbs that
yeah.
workload. I mean, it's a really common thing for people to experience. And so, you know, having those kind of check-ins and conversations on a regular basis is so important. And as much as possible, they can, as a leader, encourage their team members to take those breaks,
Mm,
and set out those micro breaks throughout the day. And those are just so important in terms of rebalancing someone's energy and making sure that they do have energy to do the work that they're doing, not in place. And I think this is really important. This isn't in place of the work design that should be taking place.
mm,
So I think this is where it can get a bit tricky, because
yeah.
people can misunderstand and say, well, taking a micro break or doing a little bit of mindfulness on the side, that's not going to fix a poorly designed job, or the workload for various people. But it's also important to understand that this is a strengthening practice for a
Mm,
person, and this can help them to just manage their energy. So I see the two going hand in hand.
yeah.
And just in terms of when we talk about well-being, I think you might have seen this as well. We've had this interesting conversation in Australia, and around the world really, where we went from the kind of the band-aid solutions and the mindfulness apps. We've
Yeah.
swung all the way over into what can we do to comply with the legislation, which is absolutely essential.
Yeah.
But I feel as though we're going to be swinging back to the middle soon, and
Yeah.
understanding that there's organizational and there's individual processes,
Hmm.
and both of these can actually support really positive outcomes. So
Yes.
yeah, so it's a sort of understanding the role, and then when you are bringing in individual processes, not just slapping them on, as a kind of, and I think this is where we have to be careful, because these things can be pushed into the HR domain as employee engagement.
Hmm.
Um, and they don't necessarily work that way, but if we can understand, well, let's get that risk management in place, let's do our, whatever kinds of prevention strategies we can,
Mm.
then what can we do on the outset, with well-being to
Mm.
support this process. I think this is the way we should be viewing it, like,
Yeah.
as not as a separate thing, but as a support mechanism. So
Yes.
yeah, I don't know if I answered your first question there, but I've just gone
No,
off on a whole different tangent. But
I love it. It was better than expected. And I actually want to leave it there because I know when I'm listening to podcasts, you get so many gems, and I want to leave that with people so that when they run back to the office or get out of the car, that's what they're thinking about. So thank you so much, Ruth. And if people want to learn more about you or connect with you, what's the best way to do that?
Look, so you can contact me on LinkedIn. I'm on there very often, every day, really posting, and I'm more than happy to connect and chat on LinkedIn. You can reach out on my website on www.sunrisewell.com.au.
Yep.
Yeah, more than happy to chat with anyone about any of these topics.
Yeah, fantastic. And I'll add them to the show notes and the links below as well so people can access them easily. But thank you so much for sharing your insights, Ruth. I really appreciate it.
Mm.
And for listeners out there, if you found this conversation valuable, please subscribe and share it. And we'll see you next time on Under the Rug at Work, where we continue to shine light on issues that are too often overlooked. Thank you.
Thank you.